Welcome to the debate. Imagine being a U.S. president staring down a brutal midterm election.
Right.
You're just completely desperate to keep gas and food prices low, only to realize that the foreign nation you are actively arming is, well, intentionally sabotaging your domestic economy to force your hand.
It's a pretty wild scenario.
It really is. And that is the exact accusation currently being leveled against Ukraine, which sits at the absolute center of our discussion today.
Yeah.
We are looking at the incredibly controversial diplomatic maneuvers executed by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy in late May 2026.
Specifically, two major actions, right?
Exactly. His highly public letter to U.S. President Donald Trump demanding Patriot air defense systems, and then his sudden, really intense warnings of an imminent military offensive from Belarus.
And the fundamental question we have to answer from the latest geopolitical analysis is whether these maneuvers are just desperate, existential acts of survival against an escalating Russian threat.
Or if they represent a calculated evolution in strategy, basically acts of geopolitical sabotage and domestic political extortion aimed directly at manipulating the American administration.
Right.
I look at the reality on the ground, and I will be arguing that these are essential, completely non-negotiable defense mechanisms against a Kremlin that has completely abandoned rationality.
And I look at the geopolitical ripple effects, and I'm taking the contrasting perspective. While the physical threat to Ukrainian cities is undeniably horrific, I'll argue that these specific diplomatic maneuvers are a cold-blooded weaponization of American domestic politics.
Okay, well, let's ground this in exactly what Ukraine is facing, because I think the context dictates the urgency here.
Sure.
We are witnessing a phase of Russian state terror that just defies conventional military logic. Look at the recent strikes using Oronic ballistic missiles.
These are the multi-million-dollar nuclear-capable ones.
Exactly. Strategic weapons designed to cross continents. And what is Moscow doing with them? They are firing them at a local garage cooperative in Bila Tserkva.
Yeah.
They are deliberately targeting residential neighborhoods. Like, they recently severely damaged the Albanian ambassador's residence right in the center of Kyiv. It is an organized campaign of terror.
It's horrific.
It is. And to make it worse, look at the diplomatic cover. You have Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova and then Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov himself picking up the phone to call U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
Right. Telling him to get out.
Basically, yes. Lavrov effectively tells Rubio to evacuate American diplomats because the strikes are about to become systematic. I mean, that's not diplomacy. That's a mafia-style warning.
A preemptive diplomatic alibi.
Exactly. It's an alibi to absolve Moscow of accountability for impending war crimes. So when a nuclear-armed aggressor tells the world they're about to systematically level your capital, requesting Patriot missiles is a literal matter of survival. It's not some grand political game. It's just the raw necessity of keeping your citizens alive.
Look, no one is denying the brutality of the Russian strikes or the absolute horror of an Oronic missile landing in a residential zone.
Right.
But we really have to separate the military reality in Kyiv from the calculated geopolitical maneuvering directed at Washington. The reality is Zelensky is executing what I call the Patriot Gambit, and it is pure political extortion.
Extortion?
Yes, because Zelensky knows perfectly well that the U.S. administration is currently bogged down by the regional conflict in Iran. Because of the ongoing blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, global supply lines are choked.
Right. American air defense assets are stretched thin.
Stretched to their absolute limit in the Middle East. So Trump is not going to send Patriot systems to Ukraine right now. The math just doesn't allow it.
So I ask.
Exactly. Why write a highly publicized letter demanding them? The true intent is to weaponize the U.S. president's rapidly falling poll numbers just months ahead of the 2026 midterms.
Wow.
Zelensky's using the undeniable tragedy of these strikes to corner the administration, forcing them to enforce energy sanctions against Russia that Washington is frankly actively trying to dodge. And he's compounding this leverage with what I call the Belarus fertilizer gambit.
Which is?
It's a move to deliberately disrupt the U.S. domestic agenda to squeeze Washington even harder.
Hold on. You're looking at Washington's political pain, but you have to look at Kyiv's military reality. You call it the Patriot Gambit as if it's some sort of trap, but Ukraine literally has no other option.
But they know the U.S. can't deliver.
Because Europe cannot fill the air defense gap left by the United States. Yes, the European Union has launched this massive 800 billion euros armament program.
Right.
And France is parading the fact that they will build, 4 to 5 Rafale fighter jets every month by the end of 2026.
Which is significant.
It is. But a purchase order in Paris does not shoot down a ballistic missile in Kiev today. The industrial capacity in Europe simply is not mature enough to replace American systems in real time.
I agree with that.
So if your house is burning down and you scream for the fire department, you aren't trying to manipulate the city council's budget. You just want the fire out.
But what if you know the fire department's trucks are all deployed on the other side of town and you scream anyway, specifically to get the fire chief fired?
That is quite the analogy.
Because that is the dynamic here. Let's look at the mechanics of the sanctions trap Zelenskyy is springing. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been trying to execute a strategy of economic warfare to strangle Russia's energy revenues.
Right.
But it's entirely failing. Why? Because it collides with the reality of global energy constraints. Because of the crisis in the Middle East and that Hormuz blockade we mentioned, global oil markets are panicking.
Right. Prices are surging.
And the U.S. administration is terrified of a massive spike in gas prices right before American voters go to the polls. So what did they do? Out of pure electoral self-preservation, the administration quietly extended the special licenses for Russian oil sales for the third consecutive time.
Yeah.
They're giving Moscow a free pass to sell crude to the global south, which directly funds the exact Orishnik missiles hitting Kiev.
Which makes Zelensky's demand completely justified. The U.S. is indirectly funding its own allies' destruction.
Justified morally, perhaps, but mechanically, it is interference. Zelenskyy's Patriot letter isn't about acquiring hardware he knows he can't get. It is a calculated spotlight aimed squarely at this hypocrisy.
I mean, it needs a spotlight.
Sure, but by publicly highlighting the devastation of Russian infrastructure attacks, he forces the American public and the global community to look at Washington. He is trying to publicly shame the administration into stopping those oil license renewals.
Right.
He's trying to compel them to enforce the sanctions completely regardless of whether it causes an economic recession in the U.S. or destroys the ruling party's chances in the midterms.
But if exposing a massive contradiction in American foreign policy, a contradiction that is literally getting Ukrainian civilians killed, causes friction in Washington, that is a consequence. It's not a conspiracy.
It's highly calculated, though.
You are characterizing a plea for survival as political blackmail. The rockets hitting the Albanian ambassador's residence are not spreadsheet calculations about swing states in the American Midwest. They are real.
I'm not denying the reality of the rockets.
The threat from Lavrov to Rubio is real. Ukraine is responding to state terror. To claim they are orchestrating this primarily to mess with U.S. energy policy feels incredibly cynical.
It's not cynical at all. It's an acknowledgement of how sophisticated Ukrainian statecraft has become. If this were purely about defense, we wouldn't see the simultaneous, highly targeted disruption of U.S. domestic policy on entirely different fronts.
What do you mean?
Well, if Zelenskyy's goal is to force Washington's hand, he needs leverage that actually hurts the U.S. administration domestically. And that brings us directly to the Belarus fertilizer gambit, which perfectly illustrates how Ukraine is actively sabotaging the American economy to maintain leverage.
Wait, you are seriously connecting a Ukrainian military warning about an invasion from Belarus to the current domestic agricultural issues in the U.S.? That is a massive leap.
It sounds like it, but it's really not.
Let's hear how exactly a security alert in Eastern Europe is supposed to be a sabotage plot against American farmers.
It is actually a brilliantly direct line. Right now, the United States is facing a crippling shortage of potash fertilizer. This was entirely self-inflicted, caused by the administration's ongoing trade dispute with Canada, which historically supplies the bulk of U.S. potash.
Okay, true.
Because of this shortage, American farmers who form the absolute bedrock of the president's voter base are facing catastrophic crop yields right before the midterms.
So Washington is panicking.
Washington is in full panic mode over food prices and rural voter revolt. So to fix this crisis quickly, the administration opened backdoor negotiations directly with Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko to import massive quantities of Belarusian fertilizer.
Right, but Belarus is under sanctions.
Exactly, and Belarus is landlocked. To get that fertilizer to the U.S., Washington applied immense diplomatic pressure on Poland and the Baltic states to ease their sanctions and open a rail and port transit corridor.
Okay, and right at the moment Washington is strong-arming the Baltics, President Zelensky holds a major press conference warning of an imminent, massive new Russian military offensive originating from Belarusian territory.
Exactly. And look at the mechanism of what that warning achieved.
It achieved situational awareness. I mean, Belarus was the primary staging ground for the invasion of Kyiv in 2022. It is a historically credible, ever-present military threat.
I don't doubt the latent threat, but look at the geopolitical utility of timing that warning right now. By sounding a catastrophic alarm about a Belarusian offensive, Zelensky essentially handed Poland and the Baltic states a flawless, airtight security and legal alibi to block the fertilizer transit. It's like Washington tried to run an extension cord through a neighbor's yard to keep their lights on, and Kyiv intentionally pulled the fire alarm so the neighbor would legally have to lock their dates.
Wow.
The Baltics can now look at Washington and say, we can't open our borders to Belarusian state trains. Ukraine just warned us they're about to invade. Ukraine intentionally torpedoed the U.S. administration's desperate domestic fix. They sabotaged a vital agricultural deal to ensure Washington feels the economic pain of this war.
Yeah, I completely reject the premise that this is some malicious sabotage plot. First of all, cutting off the economic lifelines of a Russian vassal state like Belarus, preventing them from making billions on fertilizer exports, is just standard orthodox attrition warfare.
Sure, but the timing.
But more importantly, regarding the Baltics, you are assuming a level of omnipotent, puppet master orchestration by Kyiv. Do you really think Lithuania or Poland needs Zelensky to tell them Belarus is dangerous?
No, but they need the public narrative.
The Baltic states are currently dealing with the friction of Russian reconnaissance drones repeatedly violating their sovereign airspace. They are exhibiting the natural, aggressive, immune response of threatened democracies. To frame their legitimate security fears as a Ukrainian trick to manipulate American corn prices just totally ignores the reality of Eastern Europe.
It doesn't require omnipotence, though. It merely requires a deep understanding of political leverage. Of course, the Baltics have their own anxieties.
Right.
But providing them the exact high-profile narrative ammunition they need to resist Washington at the precise moment they're being pressured, that is a highly tactical move.
I guess.
Ukraine is forcefully binding American domestic economic interests, the literal survival of the U.S. agricultural sector, directly to the geopolitical reality of the conflict. They are making sure the United States cannot comfortably insulate itself from the war.
Well, the United States shouldn't be able to insulate itself when the global order is fracturing, and that's largely because of the internal decay of the Russian Empire itself.
Which is a whole other huge factor.
Exactly. This is why Ukraine is forced to use every single tool available, orthodox or unorthodox. We have to look at the adversary they are managing. They are dealing with a Russian state that is not just dangerous, but dangerously unpredictable because it is visibly coming apart at the seams.
True.
Look at the internal chaos in Moscow right now. We are seeing a brutal, highly visible power struggle between the Federal Security Service, the FSB, and the Federal Protective Service, the FSO.
The Siloviki.
Yes, the Siloviki. The elite security and intelligence officials who actually control the levers of the Russian state. They aren't fighting over ideology. They are in a ruthless physical competition for central financial flows and institutional survival.
The institutional rot in Moscow is undeniable.
And that rot manifests directly in Putin's complete loss of strategic rationality. The Putin of the early 2000s, while ruthless, was calculating. He understood risk and reward.
Yeah.
Today, we have a leader who is authorizing the expenditure of billions of rubles to launch an intercontinental Oreshnik missile at a concrete garage. He is targeting street cafes while his military completely fails to advance strategically in the Donbass.
It's erratic.
You cannot negotiate with or deter a decaying empire that is lashing out in a state of terminal decline. It requires incredibly aggressive, forward-leaning diplomacy. And contrast that chaos in Moscow with Ukraine's internal democratic resilience.
How so?
Despite martial law, Zelensky is actively holding strategic meetings with bitter political rivals like his predecessor Petro Poroshenko. They are consolidating democratic unity to hold the line against a state that has lost its mind.
I mean, I completely agree that the structural fractures in Russia are deepening rapidly, and the evidence goes far beyond the Slovaki infighting. Just look at the financial mechanics of Gazprom.
Right.
The Russian state energy monopoly, historically the ultimate weapon of Kremlin influence, is now facing actual insolvency. Because of that financial collapse, they have literally lost the ability to pipe free, subsidized gas to the breakaway region of Transnistria.
Which changes the entire map of Eastern Europe.
Exactly. Let's explain how. For decades, Moscow used free gas to artificially prop up Transnistria as a pro-Russian separatist thorn in Moldova's side. Now, because Gazprom is broke, that gas has to be purchased and routed through Moldovan territory proper. In an instant, the leverage has flipped. The government in Chisinau now effectively holds the keys to Transnistria's survival.
Wow.
And it isn't just happening on the periphery, it's happening inside the Russian Federation. We're seeing intense centrifugal forces brewing in republics like Dagestan, Tatarstan, Yakutia, and Tuva.
Right, the ethnic republics.
Yeah. In Dagestan right now, an overwhelming 95% of the population does not consider Russian their native language. They are fiercely preserving their national identity against Moscow's attempts at forced Russification. The only thing keeping these republics from declaring outright independence is the fear of the central military apparatus.
Which is precisely why Ukraine must secure its air defense and eliminate threats like Belarus now before the complete collapse of the Russian center causes an even more catastrophic, violent lashing out across the continent.
But that is where your reasoning misses the mark, because you are misinterpreting how Zelensky views this Russian decay.
How so?
This internal Russian weakness doesn't justify Ukraine's diplomatic extortion. It explains the ultimate goal of it. It proves that Zelensky is no longer just trying to defend the borders of his territory. He sees the historic vulnerability in Moscow, and he is stepping into the role of a geopolitical grandmaster.
I mean, is that a bad thing?
Well, he is exploiting the chaos. He is using maneuvers like the Patriot demands and the fertilizer Gambit to trap a panicked, reluctant U.S. administration into finishing the economic war. He knows that if he can force Washington to completely enforce the energy sanctions and cut off Moscow's remaining revenue, it could be the final fatal push that completely shatters the Russian imperial matrix.
Look, if acting as a geopolitical grandmaster means doing everything humanly possible to stop a nuclear-armed neighbor from erasing your culture and your people from the earth, then yes, he is playing the board.
Right.
But let's be brutally honest about the reality of this so-called economic war. The U.S. administration has the power to enforce energy sanctions. They have the financial instruments to choke Moscow. They are choosing not to use them solely because of their own electoral anxieties.
Because the political cost is too high.
They are choosing cheap gas over Allied survival. Ukraine is simply refusing to die quietly in the dark so that American gas prices can stay low for a Tuesday in November.
And in refusing to die quietly, they have crossed a massive threshold. They're actively interfering in the domestic economic stability of their primary benefactor.
I wouldn't call it interfering.
By cornering the U.S. administration on the global stage, by exposing the hypocrisy of those oil license extensions, and by intentionally providing legal cover to sabotage vital agricultural trade routes, they are blurring the line between national defense and hostile political interference.
That's a strong word.
The strategy has fundamentally evolved. It is no longer just about sending a list of needed tanks and ammunition to the Pentagon. It is about systematically weaponizing the political and economic vulnerabilities of allied nations to compel their continued engagement.
Well, it seems we have arrived at a profound point of tension in how we understand the modern realities of warfare, diplomacy, and alliance.
Definitely.
To summarize my position clearly, Zelensky is managing a desperate existential defense against an adversary that has lost its strategic rationality and reverted to pure, brutal state terror. When your residential neighborhoods are being obliterated by multi-million-dollar ballistic missiles and foreign ministries are casually issuing diplomatic alibis for future war crimes, your strategies will inevitably become unorthodox and aggressive.
Yes.
Whatever domestic friction or economic pain these maneuvers cause in Washington, they are dictated by the absolute, non-negotiable necessity of keeping the Ukrainian nation alive on the map. They are acts of survival, full stop.
And to summarize my perspective, Ukraine has fundamentally evolved its strategy far beyond traditional defense, crossing into sophisticated geopolitical sabotage.
Right.
They have recognized that traditional military aid is insufficient and, more importantly, politically unreliable. Therefore, they've concluded that the only way to ensure their survival is to forcefully bind American domestic and economic interests to the Ukrainian cause.
Even if it hurts.
Right. If that means legally torpedoing a U.S. president's desperate domestic agricultural deal or publicly extorting an allied administration during a fragile election year to force an end to Russian oil licenses, they will absolutely do it. It is calculated, it is incredibly brilliant statecraft, but it is undeniable political blackmail.
Yet, despite our opposing frameworks for these actions, I think we both clearly acknowledge a very harsh reality here. The traditional 20th century mechanisms of international military aid have fundamentally broken down.
The old diplomatic rulebook is completely useless.
Exactly. Which is what forces these unconventional high-stakes tactics. The line between national defense and international political interference has been hopelessly blurred, perhaps permanently.
Yeah.
And looming over all of this maneuvering is the internal decay of the Russian Federation itself. The systemic financial insolvency of state instruments like Gazprom and the simmering national identities in the republics. That decay continues to be the massive, unpredictable wildcard shaping every single strategy in Washington, Kyiv, and Moscow.
It is a pure geopolitics of attrition at this point. Every single player on the board is aggressively searching for the pressure point that will cause the other to fracture first.
Which brings us back to the reality of allied relationships in the 21st century. We are looking at a complex, interdependent world where simply asking for help isn't enough anymore.
Right, you need leverage.
Sometimes, to ensure your allies don't abandon you for the sake of their own domestic convenience, you have to engineer a situation where abandoning you hurts them just as much.
It's a dark reality.
There are profound layers of strategy, desperation, and leverage still unfolding in this conflict. We leave it to you, the listener, to decide, are these the desperate, necessary actions of a nation fighting to survive under literal fire? Or are they the calculated brilliance of geopolitical sabotage? Thank you for joining us on The Debate.